Brothers and sisters in Christ, the commemoration of All Souls made me think about the human soul. What is a soul? When a young boy, I was not aware of the existence of souls. My first encounter with human death was when one of our teachers died. I was around 9 years old at that time. She was a good teacher, unmarried, and a Catholic. So one whole load of elementary students attended her funeral in the church. But prior to that, I had met an old man, a visitor in my grandmother's house. Don't remember how old I was. I think maybe 6, 7 or 7, 9. He had come from the island where my family originated from, Sulawesi. During our conversation, I asked him what death would be like. His answer surprised me. He said, when a person dies, he just disappears into nothingness. Nothing else. Cannot find him anymore anywhere. No trace. I was puzzled because he was also very emphatic about his belief. And yet in my mind, the mind of a small child, I was already questioning what he said. I didn't quite believe him, I guess. But I had no counter-argument against it because I had so limited knowledge and experience. So I just kept quiet. But my soul searching had just begun. The first death in my family was that of my mother when I was 18. It was unexpected. There was no warning. One day she was still at home, the next day she never came back from visiting my father, who was hospitalized because she had a massive stroke. There were no final words. When I arrived at St. Carola's Hospital, she had already made snoring sounds in the ICU, and I knew it was serious. It was at night and dark, so I walked over to the statue of Mary in the central courtyard and prayed to God that if He allowed my mother to recover, I will take care of her. But she didn't survive. I was sad, and so was my dad. But the one who was most devastated by her death was Grandma. She could not stop crying and a few times fainted. The family doctor had to give her shots of tranquilizers to keep her calm. And my grandmother kept telling what a small baby my mother was when she was born. And she thought the baby would die, my grandmother died, because she was so small and could barely hear her cry even. And my mother was born with curly hair. My grandma was a woman of faith who had always found consolation in Jesus, her friend. But that day, she was overcome by grief. She loved her eldest daughter so much because she suffered along with her during the war, raising the younger siblings, about 4 or 5, after my grandpa was killed. So at that time, looking at my grandmother, I gathered my courage and said this. I said, "Grandma, remember the Lord," I said. She suddenly stopped sobbing and looked at me as if in a daze for a few seconds. And then she started crying again. Maybe this time she was thinking that this child in front of her has no mother anymore. So she cried even louder. Brothers and sisters, that death has so much power over us. And what should be our attitude If we are honest, we would admit that like all people, we have fear over death. Isaiah described it as the mourning veil covering all people, and the shroud enwrapping all nations. Death not only ends our earthly existence, there is something about it that repels us. Hearing the death of his friend Lazarus and seeing the tears of the sister of the dead man, Jesus wept. And at the opening of the tomb of Lazarus, he sighed again. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing his own agony and death, Jesus pleaded with his Father, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me." Why did Jesus plead with his Father? Was he afraid? Well, Jesus was human, and it was normal that he would dislike pain. But I believe there was something more than just fear that caused him to plead with the Father. There was something stronger being expressed at that momentous event in the garden. It was love. I'll tell you why with this following few illustrations. Recently, I met a young man who asked me to pray for his wife. I found out later that they had a terrible accident when they were traveling in one of the neighboring ASEAN countries. The bus that they were on overturned. 2 passengers died, and his wife had some spinal injury. You know the risk of spinal injury is great. He himself has a lighter injury on his left arm, but was able to call the insurance company through his mobile phone. So they were evacuated within 15 hours. From his emotion while telling me the story, I knew that he was very concerned for his wife, perhaps more than for himself. That was love. I also experienced something similar. This brought back another memory of mine. I was 16 and at senior high school, first year of senior high school. With a few classmates, I went on holiday to the East Java, taking a bus. When we almost reached the place of destination, he was already down, and he was climbing up like this, and you know that there is valley, very deep valley on the side of the sea. And all of a sudden, the bus tipped on one side, and